All right, we are now set.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today on this webinar. We're streaming on Facebook Live, but we're also going to be recording and we'll post this on the Key Ministry Coronavirus page within a couple of hours after we're finished. I'm Catherine Boyle. I'm Mental Health Ministry Director, and I'm joined today with the whole Key Ministry team, Beth Golick, our Operations Director, Steve Gersovich, our President and Founder, and we're also welcoming Brad Hoefs, Pastor Brad. Brad has been a pastor for over 30 years. He's the founder of Fresh Hope for Mental Health, which is an organization that empowers individuals to live well in spite of a mental health diagnosis, along with their loved ones. And they offer peer-to-peer Christian mental health support groups that are recovery principle driven, and they especially emphasize hope, that there is hope in living a life with a mental illness. They have groups that are across the United States and also in 4 different countries. So they have really seen a lot of things in the mental health world. And Brad is also a person who lives with bipolar disorder. So Brad, we are just so excited to have you join us today. And thank you so much for taking time out. I know this has been a really busy time for anybody who's in ministry. So welcome today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here with you. I noticed that I've got Christmas decorations behind me. So, hey, that's good, right?
Yeah, I mean, people are putting them up again, right? To
yes,
spread a little cheer, and the Hallmark Channel's running movies.
That I just took the tree down about a month ago, so.
Well, they look great in the background. But, you know, I mean, you know, you just said, yeah, it's been an overwhelming time. I mean, it's definitely not just our ministry. It's everybody who's in ministry is feeling overwhelmed or anxious, unsure, you know, not really sure what to do next. And it really doesn't matter where you live in the U.S., whether you're in, say, the Northeast, you know, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area that's so hard hit by this right now. Yeah. Or I know you're in Nebraska, and when we talked, I think last week, you guys either had no cases or you didn't have hardly any.
Well, we don't have many, and we've now had 3 deaths.
Okay.
So, but we have that, our University of Nebraska Medical Center has the biocontainment unit where cases from all over the United States have gotten brought in. So we've got fairly good healthcare system. Hopefully it won't be overrun. But yes, I can well imagine if I was in New York right now or down in New Orleans, what it would feel like in ministry.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, so what have you been hearing from pastors and ministry leaders, you know, who have reached out to you for help? Because, I mean, you really have a significant amount of expertise in helping people with mental health issues, you know, whatever they are, anxiety, depression, you know, what are you hearing from the pastors who are connecting with you?
Well, what we've really gotten up front was, how can you help us? We know that we have people that have mental health issues, but a lot of pastors are saying, we also know that this is going to create a lot of mental health situations. And if you don't use the term mental health, if you just speak about it as emotional health, I think that's a good way to frame it, if you would. And my word to pastors is, pastors, if you think the medical people are being overwhelmed right now, get ready, because this whole emotional tsunami, this emotional mental health thing is going to come right at the church. And they may think that it's, no, that's medical too, you know, that's this or that. That's not the case, because all the research prior to this has shown that people first go to their pastors. They first go to their spiritual leaders when they have mental health stuff, when they have emotional health stuff. And secondly, the mental health care system has been overloaded prior to this. You know, it's hard to get in to see a psychiatrist. It's hard to find a therapist. People are not going to be able to just quickly do that. that tsunami is also coming at the medical side of mental health. But I don't think pastors have a clue. And if they think they're going to return to life as normal, uh, it's just not going to happen. And I see some churches doing the rah-rah, just whatever. It's almost like it's party time on snow day when you don't have any school.
Right.
And they're not preparing. And they've got to get prepared. As I watch all this stuff with them building the tent hospitals and what's going on in these cities in preparation, and the mask and the folks in the Christian church, this is coming, and it will go on for a long period of time, most likely, even after the curve is flattened, so to speak.
Right. Right. I mean, I was just looking at stats for the states yesterday. They were maybe this is something that's been published regularly already, but you can go online and find, what is supposed to be the peak day for your state. Well, I live in Virginia, and my state is number 51 on the list of 50 plus DC. We're not supposed to peak until May 19th. So even if there's not a second wave that people are starting to talk about, I mean, this is going to go on for a long time, because that's only the peak. That's not the end. So
and the fact that we're going to end up having to be in our homes and social distancing. I'm an optimist by nature, I guess, and I was telling my wife, by Monday of this week, we'll be able to start going back to somewhat life as normal. And even here in Nebraska, where I live, even though that we don't have a lot of cases and things, the governor is saying, no, this is going to go on.
right.
And wow.
Right.
And I'm of that population. I'm over 60, and I have asthma, and I'm chubby. So I probably have some high risk factors there.
Yeah, well, I mean, we definitely want you to take care of you, Brad. We need you these days for sure.
Well,
So
and I want to say to pastors, these circumstances are going to cause greater emotional needs to be met, or cause emotional distress for people, and you've got to deal with it. And if pastors think, oh, I can say, this is when we got to trust God, yes, those things are important, but I think the Christian church overall is pretty guilty of sugarcoating things for people, and we don't allow people to deal with their emotions and their feelings. And when you do that, you're just teaching people to stuff it down and say what they think they should be saying, but they're feeling all these feelings, and those things have to be dealt with. Scripture teaches us and shows us by the psalmists themselves and others how they had to vent and how they had to get that stuff out, and then they can replace it with faith. And so I think this is going to be a big learning curve for a lot of clergy. And in the process of that, to understand that you cannot, you're going to have to deal with it. We know that after natural disasters, mental health issues, now I'm talking about the real serious stuff, is it increases by 100%, and suicide rates go up significantly. I know of 2 different suicides just touched me in the last 24 hours, not people I knew or people that we even helped, but just how that's happening. And so pastors, you may have been clueless, but you're going to have a tsunami coming at you. And right now, there's a chance to start doing a few things ahead of time.
Well, so, if you were talking with a pastor who's reaching out to you for help, what are a few things they can do? Are there online training courses that you would recommend? Are there resources from your organization or others that you would especially recommend to help pastors and ministry leaders get ready?
Absolutely. I think Dr. Steve posted online today for Key Ministry and his own posts something about training for pastors that they're doing out of one of the universities, correct?
Yeah, that's not specifically a training for pastors.
Oh,
Johns Hopkins has an online course in psychological first aid that anybody can sign up for. And well, the difference between that and mental health first aid is that there is more of a trauma component to the mental health first aid than the psychological first aid. The psychological first aid is something that's been extensively researched and used in disasters. And so I think that that's a good
yes,
analog to what we're going to be experiencing over the next
yes,
60 to 90 days.
yep,
And part of why we're going to be recommending that pastors encourage people on their staff who haven't been trained in mental health first aid, as well as members of their congregation, Stevens ministers, other folks who are involved in terms of providing care and support. Is it interestingly enough, the research that's out there on this after disasters shows that peer support is actually more effective than professional support.
oh, wow. That's good to know.
Well, and I
Yeah,
think that's really interesting based on, the format of your ministry, Brad. The format of Fresh Hope is that it's peer led
yeah,
uh,
it's all
groups.
peer driven. And yeah, one of the things that we've been doing is working with the Trauma Healing Institute through the American Bible Society. So there's a couple of things that we're doing, and we recognize that this is a certain kind of distress that's being caused. It's a certain kind of trauma. It's a certain kind of emotional things are going to change for people emotionally. When you're locked up and you're not living life as you knew it, there's a lot of challenges and there's a lot of grief in that process of letting go. Just think about somebody having to live with if I think about this and I think about my own kids, and if this had been their senior year and they were giving up prom and they were giving up graduation and they were giving up a graduation party and all those things, I can only imagine what it would have been like. So what I would say to pastors is take small steps, but do something now. Start doing something now. And that would be speak about this, that it's okay to be stressed. Allow people to express their feelings and their emotions. And if they have something like a Stevens ministry in their church, start working with that. Move your counseling online, helping people talk about it, processing it while it's going on will lessen the trauma and the issues that come from it later. And really, it's as simple as asking 3 questions. In trauma healing, we ask 3 questions that are key. And one is, what happened or what is happening? Number 2, what is been the hardest part of it for you to deal with? What is the hardest part? And the third question that helps people process and get it out is, how are you doing with all of this? Just those 3 simple questions that friends, I mean, um, simple things. So I think the pastors have to very quickly, if they don't know where the resources are for helping their folks, they're going to have to grab a hold of them. For instance, take a look at our website, freshhope.us. Take a look at Grace Alliance website. There's, I'm forgetting the one, and Steve, you probably might remember the one that has the website that has all the different uh, things on it for,
Coronavirus in the church.
well, yes, yours as well as, well, I'll try to remember it. I should have written it down before we started. But from our perspective with Fresh Hope, some of the things that we're doing, and pardon me if this sounds too self-promoting, but I'm going to give a phone number right now. And if listeners want to write this phone number down, it's 415-528-7403. 415-528-7403. I wish it was easier, but that's the phone number. If you will text the word interview to that phone number, we will, from Fresh Hope, we will send out updates to everything we know about, as well as the stuff we're doing. So if you text interview to 415-528-7403. For instance, here's some of the things that we're doing right now. We have a document, if you went to freshhope.us/coronavirus/ that you can download, pastors. It's a download of how to manage anxiety that's caused by the coronavirus. Download it, distribute it to your members. I don't care if you rebrand it. I don't care if you don't want them to know where it came from, or you edit it. I don't care. And then we also have Mental Health Mondays, which is a free thing people can participate in on our Facebook page at 8:30 p.m. Central Time. Every Monday. I've just been doing talks like we've talked about trauma, we've talked about grief, and this last week I talked about resiliency, how to build up resiliency. Those things are available on our Facebook page, Fresh Hope for Mental Health. And then we also are going to start providing, and this is one thing we'll send out in this update if you text us. We are going to start sending out to pastors and ministry leaders little snippets. We've got things that our facilitators in our groups use, but it's on emotional health stuff. And we're going to provide snippets that you can put on your website, or the pastor can use, or somebody else can use, or they can just send it out to their folks, just asking questions to keep people processing and helping people's mental or emotional state through all of this. Because if we can help people deal with the stress, it will trigger less the mental illness component of this that could come later. And so stress is the big trigger. It's the issue for all of us. It's what will trip our triggers. It will make us agitated, irritated, just normally. And for those of us who have a mental health diagnosis or have the propensity towards it, you know, maybe it's in the family, we haven't had any issues with it, or blah, blah, blah. And now this is big kind of perfect storm happens, and we could easily have more of a problem. We also have we've pretty well moved all of our Fresh Hope groups across the nation online. And plus we have online groups anyway. Now here's the biggie that we just decided this morning that we're going to be doing. The Trauma Healing Institute of the American Bible Society, which we're very connected with, and we do trauma healing groups on a regular basis anyway. They have created a group type thing called Healing from Distress of the COVID-19 Crisis. So it's called Healing from Distress of the COVID-19 Crisis. And we are going to be offering those groups online. It's just a process of what's going on. It helps people process from a biblical perspective the emotional stress and the distress they're feeling. We'll be doing it for adults, and we will also be doing it for children. They have it for children also. So we will provide those groups online, free, no cost to people. And that's one commitment. There's nothing we're going to make off of any of this. It's all about getting help to pastors, people in ministry, so they can help their people. The other thing is we do have a whole bunch of messages on emotional and mental health on our page for the pastors on our website. There, I got it all out.
Well, and we'll make sure that we put all these resources in our COVID-19 coronavirus page, but freshhope.us is the website if you're looking for it now. And there's a few things that have come through the chat. I just wanted to go ahead and read those in case you wanted to make a comment, Brad, but also
Sure.
so, you know, if people can't see the chat. Let's see, Nancy recommended New Life Ministries radio counseling show with Steve Arterburn. Yeah, he does good work.
Yep.
John Skaggs recommended or mentioned that there is a webinar for faith-based communities happening right now by the Health and Human Services
Yes.
faith-based organization that
Yep.
you and Key Ministry are part of. They
Yep.
record those and then they are available, and we'll probably share this on our social media. For sure it will be linked on our coronavirus page.
Yes, in fact, they do. They've been even working with some great things right now. And they have great resources and access to a lot of help that's out there. So Ben and Shannon do a great job. So
yeah, they sure do. They sure do. Okay, well, just a reminder, if you've got a question for Brad, we're about halfway through our time. So, you know, if you have a specific question, please post it in the chat or on Facebook Live and we'll get to it. So Beth, do we have something?
Yes, so there's a little in the Facebook Live chat, there's some expression of frustration for having pastors hear this message. So what are some suggestions you have in case there aren't pastors on this call, but people who would like to share this information with their pastors?
yeah, boy, that's the frustration. I can say this. I think if you have a pastor, you need to, and maybe it's not the senior pastor on the staff of your church, you need to really say to them, please listen to this, or please understand this. I'm going to create some videos, and my plan was later today. I cut my own hair last night, so I wanted to make sure I looked pretty, as pretty as I get. But we're going to make some short videos and put them online, and we're going to target pastors and ministry leaders and just say, folks, you've got to get a clue. And hopefully people will just share those with pastors, because I can tell you, I've been a pastor of a very large church and I can tell you what they're thinking, and they may tell you they're not thinking that, but they are. Their first thought is, how do we keep this going? We've got a budget. We've got huge amounts of money we've been bringing in. And now, you know, because people can worship online, but I suspect there's fewer people worshiping online than if they were having it in person. That's just a hunch I have. And then the second thing is I don't think the offerings will be the same. So they've got this organizational thing, especially if they're a senior pastor, going on in their head. And how do we meet these needs? Okay, we can't have Easter. How are we going to do that? How are we going to do this? How are we going to, you know, how do you have communion online, for instance? And for some of us, that's really an issue because we're sacramental, blah, blah, blah. But what they're failing to see is that if they don't meet this emotional need, if they don't meet this tsunami coming at them, and they don't pivot towards that, they're going to really miss what it'll be worse for them. And so, yeah, I don't, getting to pastors is a difficult thing. If they haven't experienced the pain and the difficulties themselves, many times they're really hard to reach. And so I would say, bug your pastor, tell your pastor. And I'm going to be as raw as I've ever been with pastors when I make these videos, because I'm going to say, folks, you need to listen. You need to get this. One of the people that's saying it well is, oh gosh, he was in charge of the research for Gateway.
Ed Stetzer.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ed Stetzer. Send some videos from him. He made one in his basement a couple of, maybe a week ago or something.
We shared it. Yeah.
Yeah, get him in front of them. If they don't believe me, get him. Get some others. And you cannot avoid talking about the emotional distress this is going to be causing people. And the longer it goes on, the more difficult it's going to be. I mean, I think that's why the president's been itching just to get the country up and going, because I think, that's one of the things he knows intuitively. And I think our political leaders know intuitively, but medically, we can't do it. It's not a good thing. And in the meantime, the church can be not only preparing for it, but we can start addressing those things and helping people process them, just like we're talking about in this distress thing that we'll offer online. Because if we just keep those 3 questions that people would just ask each other on a regular basis, that I suggested earlier, what has happened or happening to you, how has it, or what's the hardest part of it, and how do you feel about it? I think that would help a lot.
Right.
Can
Yeah.
I put a slightly different spin on Brad's answer for a minute? One of the things that I would encourage folks to do, if they're in a congregation, they want to see more done with this, is to serve your pastor. Like when you start thinking about people whose lives have been disrupted over the last few weeks, we're talking about folks who have had to change the entire way that they do their work basically overnight. And so that a month ago that there were a lot of large evangelical churches that had their services online. I saw 75% of churches in America attempted to do that this past weekend, with a lot of these guys having very little experience with technology and with their staffs being displaced from the church in many instances. The other piece of this is for the guys who, sort of the core of their ministry is pastoral care. One of the issues with this particular condition is that you can't be with your people when they need you the most. And so figuring out how to do ministry, when you can't go into somebody's hospital room as folks get sick, is going to be a very challenging thing, I think, emotionally for a lot of pastors to be able to deal with. And so when you look at the data that's out there, saying that 20% of these guys are struggling with depression anyway, if you look at some of the data out of Duke, I think you ought to think about your pastor in the same way you think about an emergency room doc or somebody who's an intensivist right now.
I like that.
I mean, they're really first responders.
Yeah, we are. And the sad thing is that pastors are first responders who've never been trained to be first responders when it comes to emotional and mental health stuff. It's almost like the car accident comes to us, we stand there and we can see that it's horrible and people need help, but what do we do other than call 911? But we're the 911 they called. And in my thinking, pastors have to know how to do triage. Who do you need to get to a doctor as fast as possible? Who could really benefit from some peer support, and they don't need to get in to see a counselor. It's tough. Because if somebody came into my office with a heart attack, even though I haven't practiced it for many years, I would know sort of what to do, call 911, but we better start CPR now. Whereas if it's an emotional crisis or a mental health crisis, it can really be tough for pastors to know what to do. So I like that, Steve, because if you served me, when will you be over to serve me? I'll be happy to receive your service.
The airlines aren't exactly flying to Nebraska these days, if you haven't noticed.
Well, as long as you're not coming from New York, you could come here, I suppose. But yeah, it's if you serve your pastor, and because their families are suffering right now too. I mean, I've been working my tail off since we got locked up, so to speak, and it's been nonstop. And I can only imagine for what church staffs are doing right now, because they have to pivot. They can't just sit and wait for it to be over.
Right. Yeah. And for anybody who hasn't watched the video interview that was done by, well, Ed Stetzer was part of it with the Send Institute. They interviewed several Italian and Spanish pastors on what their experience has been over the past couple of months. And it is gut wrenching to watch it, but it was done so that the American and North American church can be ready. So we linked to that on our social media and on our coronavirus page on keyministry.org. So we just really, really encourage you to share that, to watch it. You know, it'll wake some people up, that's for sure.
Yes.
Couple other things, or one other thing in the chat from Dawn. Health and Human Services, ASPER, I don't know what that stands for, has a collection of COVID-19 behavioral health resources that can be helpful. And so we will post that link on our coronavirus page, and we'll go through them and see, you know, what we especially want to highlight on our social media as well. So, you know, one of the things that was also mentioned in that that video, the interview with the Italian and Spanish pastors, was preparing for grief. So what would you say, you know, to pastors who are listening to this, watching this, about how they can best be prepared for, you know, people's grief? Because, you know, it's such an unusual thing. You can't have a funeral. You can't be in the hospital with your loved one who is really sick or is dying.
Yeah.
So, you know, what advice would you give?
I think understanding, hopefully pastors have somewhat of an understanding about grief to begin with, but then this becomes a more complex grief. It's more compound. It has these aspects of not being able to have a funeral, or not being able to do this, or not being able to do that. And I think pastors have to help people very quickly understand, to come up with creative ways to approach even not being able to have a service. Or, as I know, for instance, the rule here is right now, we can't have groups 10 or larger. So I know of a church that had a funeral service for someone. They made sure that they only had 10 people in it or less, and that included the clergy. And then they showed it or put it online live for the family members. Things like that, a memorial service later, or, to be creative that way. But processing that grief, I think, for instance, if a church doesn't have grief support groups, they're going to need to do that. They're going to need to start grief support groups specifically for this period of time. And they could do that online already. They can be offering grief support. But there's also another kind of grief that's happening. And that is, it's not because of the death of someone, but it's because of the death of life as we knew it for right now. And for instance, there are people, and they're in every church, where there's already been marital conflict. They might have been in the midst of preparing to get a divorce. They were in the process, and now everybody's working from home and the kids are there. That grief and that anger and that all that wadded up, and grief is always part of those situations. And I think pastors are just going to have to very quickly understand that part of their pastoral care is going to have to be to listen carefully. Don't assume. Let people tell you what they're experiencing, what they're feeling. And I do know this: pastoral care in the hospital, touching their hands, being with the family as somebody's very ill is so important. But I also know that you can reach out to people who are sick via the phone, FaceTime. I saw an interview of some nurses that were doing FaceTime with families of their loved ones who were dying. Interestingly enough, sometimes we connect just as well through online stuff when we know we can't be there. And so thank God, we have the internet and all of that. I couldn't imagine what it would have been like in 1917, 1918 with the thing that went through our country then. Can you imagine?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are a lot of really excellent resources that are readily available through hospice organizations. And in fact, later today, we're going to have a link to some information from, I think it's the Hospice Resource something of America. But they, as having had a loved one in hospice at end of life, I mean, they really do an outstanding job, and they do an outstanding job of creating and providing support for families who were left, after the loved one has passed. So
Absolutely.
really encourage churches to just get familiar with those resources right now while, maybe they're not being overwhelmed with these kind of requests at this time. So
Yes. Yeah.
yeah. So Beth, did you have something that was on the Facebook chat? I saw you saying something a second ago. No, are you good? Okay. Well, so Brad, I mean, I know Fresh Hope does such a wonderful job of inspiring people to be hopeful in the midst of whatever life has presented to them. So, what specific hope do you offer, maybe even specific to this time of coronavirus that maybe, other groups and ministries haven't specifically honed in on? What word would you offer to those listening?
Well, here's what I would say. And in my thinking, and I could be wrong, maybe the doctor will have to correct me, but in my thinking, it's very important to understand that we as Christians right now have two things going on for us. We see what's happening this direction, but we also know the possibilities of what's happening in this direction. And so I always tell people that it's possible to live at the intersection of hopelessness and hope. And one is what I see. I see lots of suffering. A lot of people are going to die. It's going to be difficult. It's something no one else has ever faced. It's a very real street. It's actually happening. There is a pandemic, and it's okay to feel the feelings. Feel the feelings. Hopelessness, in my thinking, this situation is not technically hopeless. In my thinking, there are no situations that are ever hopeless. But this is a situation that feels absolutely hopeless for many. And if I were in one of these large cities trapped where I would just it would just cause me emotional distress like nobody's business. I've been in New York recently and thought to myself, there's too many people around me. I was glad to get out of there, and it was trouble just getting out of the airport, and that was packed, and that was just a normal day. So it can feel hopeless, but in Christ, for those of us who are Christians, we know there are no hopeless situations. It can look pretty bad, this street. But then when we plug faith into it, we go also the other direction. And now we have hope, even in the midst of hopeless feelings. And that hope is not necessarily feeling. We may not feel hope right now, but it's there.
Hey, Brad, if I can add my 2 cents.
Sure.
When you take a look at the research that they've done around disaster preparedness, when people were having to experience some event that was outside of their own control, one of the things that they had found most helpful was to have them engage in the preparation and have them engage in serving other people through that event. So that if I were a pastor of a church right now, I would be thinking about like who on my team could help people to organize, to
Yes.
get families together, thinking about like how do you get food and other supplies to people who are at especially high risk, who can't even take the chance to like leave the house to go to the grocery store.
Right.
How do you engage your people in providing the social support that folks are going to need to get through this?
Yep.
And so that, as much as we can do, to have as much interpersonal connection with one another, because this is an unprecedented situation, and they're going to be like, PhDs all over the country earning tenure, like writing papers off of this situation,
Yeah.
from now till the end of time, and so that, because it's unprecedented, one of the things that I would hope that we will do that'll help to mitigate this, is the ability to use some of the tools that we have available, technology. You mentioned the phone. I understand that some places people still like write letters and do things like that, and so that everything that folks can do right now, to support one another and maintain those kinds of connections may in fact have, some benefit or some protective role for the people who are doing good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I saw on the news last night, I don't remember, I think it was ABC, where there are neighbors. There's a couple that has the porch on top of their porch, the lower in the front part of their house, and they're playing dance music or rock and roll music every evening at 5:30 p.m. and all the neighbors come out and dance. Just that's the other thing. There's two other things that I would say as a pastor, I would say to my people. One, you got to keep your sense of humor. My brother-in-law, who owns a sports bar or sports grill and bar, he he had a thing the other night. If you buy dinner for takeout and it's $25 or above, you get a roll of toilet paper with it. Fun things that people are doing. Keep a sense of humor. The second thing is don't ruminate about this. You can't watch the news 24/7 about this. Get your mind off of it. Read a book. Go help your neighbor. Go help somebody. Serve somebody somehow, some way. Do something and get outside of your head and just sitting around and stewing and brewing, because that ruminating does nothing more than create that groove, and your brain gets stuck in it, and you've got to stop that. That's as simple as Paul saying, take captive your thinking. And it is the kind of thing that, and I think in ministry right now, it would be really easy to start ruminating as a pastor, for instance. And I think Steve's thing about serving our leaders is right on, because they are on the front lines. And I can only imagine the medical people I know and what they're going through and how difficult it is, and even helping them, serving them. We had somebody here in Omaha that went and had signs made, letters made, where they put in front of all the hospitals, heroes work here. And, the lady was just having a blast doing it. And so I think there's just so many things that people can be doing for other people right now. Yeah, I appreciate that, Steve.
Yeah, it's been pretty cool to see all the endless ways that people have been creative, through this time. And there's a ministry leader that we're all connected to, who asks every day, what are you reading in your Bible? And, lots and lots of encouraging things about, get in your Bible. Don't just spend all day, in this endless loop of articles that are popping up, and because it's very easy, as you said, to just get stuck.
Well,
in
and
that
speaking
loop.
of that, I think of the passage, there's two that really stand out to me, but one is, of course, kind of a foundational passage for me, and that is Romans 8:28. God can take all things, and for those who love him, this is a no-brainer. I keep thinking, maybe I should just get the virus now while they've got plenty of ventilators, because I'll probably need one if I get it. Because, my sense of humor about it is, let's get this over with so I can get on with life. And But God can take this, no matter how it plays out for any one of us, and he's going to take it and make it for our good. And he's going to do that same for all those who love him and are called according to his plan and purpose. And then the other one is the Isaiah 43 passage. Even though you go through the fire, the water, you go through all these things. And then he says in Isaiah 43, I think it's 18, verse 18, he says, but do you see I'm doing a new thing? See, I think this is going to be the opportunity for us to draw close to the Lord as a country. It's going to be the opportunity for churches they're going to have to stop doing it the way they've always done it, even after this. And I think God's getting our attention, you know. It's a good pause. This is an incredible time where some phenomenal things are probably happening. I mean, and we don't even see them now. I never thought I'd enjoy listening to fireside chats by the governor of New York, but I actually find it rather comforting to listen to his fatherly advice for, you know, an hour long or whatever. I always wonder why all those other people are there on the other side of him, because they hardly ever get to talk, kind of like I'm doing now.
Well, yeah, in Ohio, where Beth and Steve are, you know, they have their 2:00 appointment every day with the governor there, and it has a little nickname that I'm not going to share with our viewers, but it's quite well known, apparently.
Wine with the wine.
Yeah, well, okay, you can say it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I saw, I don't even know who it was, you know, that was saying it, that, you know, how often does God get the entire world's attention at the same time? I mean, like, you can count on one hand in recorded history. I mean, the flood, you know, however widespread that was, the flood, the 1918 pandemic, you know, world wars, and that's about it.
Yeah,
so,
and not even at the birth of his own son.
Exactly. Or the death of his own son.
Yeah, not even at his resurrection.
Right. Right.
And so that's the other thing that I've been just trying to do, is be still and listen. And, you know, it's Psalm 46, but be still and know that I am God, you know. And God is our fortress and our refuge. There's really no reason to be afraid right now. I get being locked up. I get those things, but I'm shocked. I am an extrovert. I don't like to be in my house for long periods of time. I do enjoy being at home when I've been on the go. I'm shocked. I've been almost in the house for 3 weeks now, and it's just not bothering me. In fact, I'm growing kind of accustomed to having my pajama bottoms on while being on Zoom. I don't have them on today. I have shorts on today, just regular old shorts, because we got warm weather. But even the smallest things, like going outside and sitting on the front step and just sitting there, it reminds me of how life used to be. And I'm enjoying it.
Yeah.
You know, one other thing that I would add is that when I was hosting I was on another church's men's Bible study this morning that I was invited to, you know, and the pastor, the guy who was leading it, was very much, he was not as optimistic as you know, and he was grousing about the fact that despite the fact that God has the entire world's attention, he didn't feel like anybody was responding to that. And I got an email the other day from like the guys at Life Church who created the software that a lot of churches are using to go online.
Sure.
They had 31,166 people make new first-time commitments to Christ during the online services that were streamed last weekend. And, you know, the part of me that, you know, if I hadn't gone to med school, maybe I'd be an evangelist, is that, you know, as people have become more aware of their own mortality, and, you know, I told the guys from my own Bible study that my guess is within the next 2 weeks, everybody in this group will know someone who died. You know, and, you know, as people reflect upon that, you know, I can't imagine a better opportunity for those of us who are of faith to, you know, to introduce friends, to the gospel and point them toward Jesus. A big part of how we're going to do that, is how we demonstrate to them that we're coping with the situation ourselves.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I would encourage folks that, other people around you are learning from the way that you are responding to an anxious situation, particularly your children, and our ability, to be able to convey that peace that transcends all understanding is going to be really attractive to people at a time like this.
Yeah. And here's the deal. I say, the salt has been kneading in the salt shaker for many years. Okay. The light has been gathering around the bright light for many years. Now the Lord takes the salt shaker, turns it upside down. Ooh, and there was a little coffee in there yet. He turns it upside down, and the church is finally outside of the walls. But what I fear is that the church may not listen and instead be gathering again on Zoom. And I think we just got to see this as this is the time. I've always thought in my head, in these last couple of years, when I preach, I told my people, you have got to start learning how to feed yourself. You've got to learn how to navigate through the Word of God. You've got to know, because there may be a day when we can't gather. There may be a day when you can't get fed by a preacher. And to me, this is one of those times where I think the body of Christ is going to mature. I think people are going to say, hey, Pastor, let's do this. Let's reach out to our neighborhoods this way. Hey, let's do this. And suddenly, not everything's going to go through the pastor or go through the board of directors or the elders. And ministry is just going to be happening spontaneously. And quite honestly, I think that's how it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I think that might be a great conversation for another day, because one of the things that I've seen written multiple times is, we search for relevant content for our audience, is that, people who are in their homes need to be able to feed themselves. They need, they need to be able to shepherd their families, because they, the father, the mother, the parents together, however they want to do it, are now the leaders of that little flock.
Yep.
So, so that's a great point.
And I think Steve's point about this is the time when our kids are watching us. This is the time when our children are watching us. This is the time to teach good resiliency. We have to be resilient spiritually, emotionally, physically. Life throws you curves, and life sucks sometimes, but God is really good. And so you go through the sucky time, you whine and complain a little bit, but in the end, you're like the psalmist. Why am I so downcast? Oh, I'm going to put my hope in God. And you learn how to lament. I think it's amazing. That's the other thing we teach in trauma healing. You learn how to lament. Man, I'm telling you, if we really translated some of the Hebrew, where it talks about how in the psalmist is saying, oh, I'm all upset or whatever, we translate it nicely, but it means that their bowels are churning. That's what it would be literally in the Hebrew. And these guys weren't holding back. They were complaining. And, Paul had some pretty clear language in the New Testament, but we've made it all so sweet and flowery and religious that we miss the fact that these guys complained. God, why are my enemies being successful? Why is, and then they would end up lamenting. They would say, God, you're the only one who can do this. They would lament. And then at the end of the lament, they would, and it's interesting because it's God's way of allowing us to complain, but he gets us out of the loop of complaining then by stating faith at the end of the lament. So instead of ruminating with no resolve, then we resolve to trust him. And, that's all we can do through this. It's out of my control. It's out of anybody's control. It's even out of the government's control. And God's moving, and he'll do something good.
Well, that seems like a really good note for us to finish on today, because we're just about out of time. But if people would like to reach out to you directly, how can they find you, Brad?
Sure. Just connect with me through email, Pastor Brad at freshhope.us. And again, I'll give that number if you don't mind. If they
Sure.
want to get updates, just like they do through you guys, if you'll just text the word interview to this number, 415-528-7403. And just text the word interview to that. And then, you know, we'll keep you updated. We've got some really good things here in the next day or two that are going to be coming out to help people. We're really about helping the individual, but I really feel also a sense of call to help pastors understand this. So
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Brad, for being with us. Please make sure to visit our website, keyministry.org, and look for our coronavirus page. It's linked at the top of our homepage. We update it every single day. We share updates on social media from that page every single day. And we will be having more of these kind of discussions. Even one tomorrow, we're going to be talking with Sandra Peoples about cultivating resilience in special needs families.
yeah.
So thanks everybody
for
joining.
all that you do, and thank you for having me. But I really appreciate you guys. You're like family.
Well, thank you. Thank you. We're glad you could be with us today. So again, we're recording this, and look for it posted on our website within a couple of hours. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining.
Thank you.